Hello, this project explores the parallels in Russia's foreign policy within its sphere of influence and beyond it. One does not need to know much about world politics to know that Russia has a reputation for an aggressive foreign policy. But Russian aggression often does not limit itself to airstrikes in Syria or the infringement of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. To try to better understand the similarities in Russia's relations with its neighbors and the rest of the world, I divided the information into three categories: political or military influence, economic influence, and cultural or social influence. Within these categories, the tactics employed by the Russian government reflect both development and continuity, as Russia's recent history helped lay the foundation for the present. From the 15th century till even now, Russia has pursued an expansionist policy and by 1917 included the territory of the 14 republics. Early years of the Soviet Union were defined by egalitarian ideals, and the landmass that was the Russian Empire was divided up into republics according to ethnic groups. This period of Korenizatsiya didn't last long, as the USSR began deporting entire ethnic groups in 1937. These deportations and the freedom of movement resulted in the ethnic Russians residing outside of Russia's borders becoming the largest minority in Europe by 1989. The Soviet period also saw the building of military bases and development of industries all throughout the republics, and to encourage the homogeneity strived for by Moscow, Russian language and culture was forced upon the republics. This all fostered a culture of interdependence between the other republics in Russia. This map shows Russia's former and current territories and when they were acquired. 21st century Russia now again dominates the region and upkeeps many of the former Soviet military bases. However, military bases aren't the only way Russia maintains control, and Moscow regularly props up or helps remove leaders in the region based on their stance towards Russia. In regional military confrontation, special forces and military aid is favored. But Russia's relations in the region are not all aggression. In an attempt to maintain the relative amity between the republics established during the Soviet era, Russia and several of its neighbors have both economic and military agreements. Russia is the economic power in the region, and many of the former republics depend on Russia as a result of economic incentives and aid, as well as for trade, as Russia often serves as the link to Europe. Notable here is also oil or gas diplomacy, or Russia's threat of oil or natural gas cutoffs to keep neighboring regions under control. This map shows Russia's oil and natural gas pipelines through the former Soviet republics, though it is also useful to point out Europe's dependence on Russian oil and natural gas. In culture, there remain large numbers of ethnic Russians outside of Russia who continue to support Russia and often force local governments to fall in line. The Russian language, which thanks to Soviet education is spoken by a lot of people in the former Soviet republics, makes these people particularly susceptible to propaganda in Russian, and naturally, if disinformation is not enough, Russia is thought to have hacked or manipulated local elections in its favor. Russia's global politics is similar to regional politics, as Russian leaders attempt to maintain the influence globally the Soviet Union had and to expand upon it. Like in the former republics, Russia looks to maintain or establish military bases around the world, just as they similarly look to protect leaders who are allies, and when getting involved choose to do so in a discreet manner that would make laying blame on Russia difficult. Just as the Soviet Union had been America's rival militarily and economically, Russia seeks to be as well. Russia serves as a trading partner for countries who cannot rely on U.S. trade or are under sanctions. Russia has been under sanctions as well, and that period proved, if anything, European reliance on Russian gas and oil exports. Trade is not the only way Russia exerts its influence. Moscow also provides economic and military influence to numerous developing countries. Here is two maps. This first map shows Soviet aid, and this shows Russian aid to countries around the world. In social or cultural influence, the strategy is the same, with Russians abroad supporting the Russian interests with donations or such. Russian media is accessible online, but is responsible for only some of the internet disinformation attributed to Russia. And finally, in addition to the fake news, Russia is most memorably linked to the hacking of elections, a tactic Moscow arguably would have perfected after years of practice with its neighbors' elections. Thank you for listening.